Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning for the Women in Tech Leaderships webinar series. I'm absolutely excited and chuffed to bits to say that we've got a fantastic speaker today. The subject for today is initiating stealth mode to build your tech career. And I'm not going to go in any detail as to what that means, but Vanessa will be explaining all shortly. Just before we start, I'm Lou. I head up the recruitment team at Crimson. Crimson is both a technology consultancy business practicing with lots of Microsoft products, Azure, cloud services, etc., as well as having a skills part of our business, which is effectively tech talent. And we recruit digital and tech talent UK-wide for a whole host of customers, as well as obviously supporting our solutions business with their customers when there's an extra need for resource optimization. A bit about us, I'm not going to sort of read that all out, but we're a really established business. We've been going for over 25 years now. As I mentioned, we're part of a Microsoft product suite of services which our technology consultancy practice provides, and we provide specialist IT recruitment and also CIO search services. We do a lot of leadership events. We believe that you've got to give something back all the time. So as well as recruitment and working with great partners and customers and candidates, of course, we do look to do a lot of webinars and workshops and events, obviously the Women in Tech being one of those. Nash Squared is our parent company. We also have a range of sister companies, you can see in the brands below, the likes of Spinks, Flex House, Harvey Nash Group, some of you may have come across in the past, and Nash Tech is that parent umbrella, looking at all of those businesses across 17 countries worldwide, and we have about 49 offices all over the world. So really nice organization with both technology and talent solutions. So Women in Tech, we used to do these in person before the pandemic, but like all things evolve, we realized that we were really going to be able to really open up our reach by obviously putting them on the webinars, and the pandemic really encouraged us to do that. And it's been really successful. We have a range of speakers in our series of Women in Tech. Oh, sorry, if you can put yourself on mute, if you're not actively engaged, that'd be great. And so we like to really always invite insightful speakers to attend these sessions, people who have got a story to tell often, and obviously we're trying to appeal to all people within the tech space who are aspiring to be leaders or are leaders, and really how you go about really ensuring that you're bringing the the sort of open discussions, no judgment type forums, so that we can really truly feel that amongst your peer group, you can really get some good hints and tips and hopefully some inspiration along the way. It's also about finding solutions. So we often have lots of people like today really sharing their experience as a leader in tech, and really hopefully helping to both support their peer groups, but also inspire those looking to sort of build their careers going forward. And also it's all about having fun. A lot of the people who have been on these networks in the past and joined our webinars or been in our in-person events have really got to know lots of other great people in the industry, and it's a really good way to get to know other people, obviously. So that said, I will move quickly on to our guest speaker today. So we have Vanessa. Vanessa is a former detective superintendent, and she is going to be sharing her journey with us today. So I'm not going to say anything else. Vanessa, welcome, and we'll let you kick off.
Thank you, Lou. That's great. So just to give some context to everybody, when I say former detective superintendent, it was Thursday of last week I handed my warrant card in. So it really was quite emotional. If you've been a police officer for over 30 years, it becomes absolutely part of who you are. You're intrinsically a police officer, and so it was a big thing for me. So it's very recent. I'm not swinging the lamp too tragically, but here I am. So thank you for joining us. I hope that I can share just, a little bit about how I progressed through my journey to become a detective superintendent in charge of a business which offers cyber support for free to smaller businesses. Next slide, please. Okay then, so GCHQ have said that it is mission critical to make sure that they improve diversity in tech. This is because we need the right mix of mindsets so that we can respond to future threats. So this is GCHQ looking at our national security. Then bringing it back to pure business, the Apple boss Tim Cook said that there's still a problem recruiting women and retaining them in the tech sector. He said it's because of a lack of role models out there. Now, I think we've moved on probably a little bit since then, but blaming women for not having enough women is an interesting angle, one could argue, but certainly one where we can make that difference. Next slide. So we've all seen examples, far too recent, where we've had, speaking candidly, white men who have been thinking about white men as an example for how to come up with the best solution. So you've got the crash test dummies there on the left, and then you've got the medical equipment, and so people who were non-white or women were not being protected in both scenarios, and obviously in COVID we had certain sections of the community who were very bitter because of tragic losses of their family, which was absolutely disgraceful. So actually, when we start talking about diversity and inclusion, it's not just about the airy-fairy, oh, it's a nice to do, it's morally right. It's also about the fact that it's good for business, because if you have a diverse team, then you will come up with what we describe in Westminster Police as a richer picture, and that's really positive for business. But you'll also have better morale, better inclusion, and also you are recruiting from a larger pool of talent. But I don't need to tell you all that, do I? Next slide, please. Okay, so bringing it back to IT, I joined the police 20 and a half years ago, and after about 6 months of being in the police, they decided to move from paper records that monitored seized.
Yeah, to be honest, I think we might be able to do it bulk once we're in there. It's a clicking.
Sorry, Vanessa. Can I just ask anyone who's not part of the presentation until we ask questions, just to keep yourselves on mute? We keep in.
Okay, I'll can you still hear me?
Yes, we can. Sorry about that, Vanessa. I'm not sure
That's okay.
who's dropping in and out, but I know it's distracting, so keep going. You're doing brilliant.
Excellent. Well, this is my embarrassing bit. This is so it's okay. So my early IT experiences, we had paper records for when we seized property. Like if we seized, I don't know, a bit of evidence or some farm property. So we had paper records, and they decided to modernise. So we're talking 30 years ago. So they made a computerised system, and I used it on a Friday evening for the first time ever. I was quite nervous. Other officers were sat around me watching me do it, and I crashed the system for the whole of the force, and it wasn't up and running again until the next week. So I really lost my bottle. So IT was something I was always a little bit nervous of. Then move on to some of my next experiences in policing. Next slide, please. So as a police officer, and I'm certainly not going to get really heavy here, you see some harrowing things. You see harrowing events, that the impact of different incidents, of crime, of accidents, of temper. And you learn very quickly that actually, if you can prevent some of this, then it's far better than trying to deal with the aftermath. So that's those are some of the experiences that police officers deal with, frankly, every day. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the things that that we were taught when I was quite young in service is that we should all become omnicompetent instead of being specialists. Now, I'm saying this to people who are in the tech industry, so bear with me on this journey, because it will come round again to being strong in your field. So if you can't put your hands to most things, if you can't roll with it, then you can be seen as inflexible or narrow, and that can sometimes make you vulnerable if there is a change program that comes in. And so I've seen many a time specialists who have really become very niche in their area, their field of expertise, but then they back themselves into a corner. They have no flexibility. They think that they are the only person who can do that role. And then somebody younger can come along and frankly, knock them off their pedestal. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to feel confident that no matter where the Chief Constable posted me, I was able to take that role on. So I did some roles as a constable, became a sergeant, and then as a sergeant, I really started to embrace this concept. So I did neighbourhood policing, response work. So that's your blues and twos. Major emergency planning. So I was counting the amount of body bags that we had in case of a major emergency, and looking at how we would deal with 1,500 deaths in 2 or 3 different disasters all at one time. I went on to the forced traffic department because I was a graded advanced driver. I became a diversity champion. I led on trust and confidence and defender management. So all of these I did, and it made me really capable. And what I was doing, it later became a really popular and important catchline for Sheryl Sandberg. What I was doing was I was leaning in. So and sometimes I was doing this even when I wasn't feeling very confident, but I would ask questions and I would put forward solutions, and occasionally I'd get knocked back or ignored. I put a solution forward to a chap who was 3 ranks above me, and he just looked at me as if I was well, frankly, green with pink spots, and then he simply looked away without acknowledging what I'd suggested. So we all have those moments where we are knocked back, but actually what happened was I was presenting myself as wanting to help, wanting to be part of the solution, wanting to be part of the way forward, and that was really positive for how people perceived me, and it was important for me because I wanted to be within that type of role. I didn't want to be inflexible or so niche that I was vulnerable when change programs inevitably come in. Next slide, please. Okay, so what happened was I really amassed a lot of transferable skills, and I also created for myself a really important network of contacts, friends, and allies. So events such as this are hugely important for women in tech, because if you've got somebody that you can just pick up the phone and just say, do you know what, is it me? Am I bonkers here? Or actually, I'm really struggling with this at the moment, or can you explain this? You're really good at that. That's so important. And one of the things that I find is equally as important is making sure that you encourage other women who don't currently do it to do it, because it can becomes a light bulb moment. And so I found this really positive, because I knew that if I didn't know something, I could find somebody who would. And if I was posted somewhere hostile, then there would be a friendly face nearby to support me, and that was really important, because the more roles I took on, the more omnicompetent I became, and the more I delivered on the work that I was given, the more difficult the roles I was given to deliver on. And sometimes I really was thrown into very hostile environments where, frankly, I felt as if I needed a stab vest on within the office. It was really very, very harsh, because when you have a team or a department who are male dominated and they are very old fashioned, for a younger female who is modern and hippie-ish or left-wing in her style, that can be a threat to their territory. And so there were times where I was sent to, and this is very, very masculine terminology, but sometimes I was sent into departments described as the last bastions of malehood. Well, if you're going in there, you need to make sure that you've got some friends, some allies, some contacts nearby, because sometimes you need to offload, but not to the people you're supervising or the colleagues who are allegedly on your one of your peers, but they would undermine you at the drop of a hat. So that networking was hugely important. The transferable skills were really important as well. So that's what I was building by doing lots of different roles within policing. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Vanessa. Can I just ask you a question on that point? And it was really interesting what you just said, because often with people I've managed and helping to coach new managers into that role, or leaders into those roles, there's often a really difficult balance between being the leader, the manager, and to your point, with colleagues and people that you're responsible for or supporting. It's so difficult, isn't it, to separate the emotion and the feelings and the needing to discuss and voice and vocalize sort of feelings of frustration with that network group. So it's really important that you've just said that. It's important to have that set of allies and network of contacts almost outside of the immediate environment, isn't it? But that's such a hard thing for people to do. Often, have there ever been times where you haven't done it so well, and it has caused any conflicts of interest or anything? Because that's a really, it's easy to say, but it's a difficult thing that I think most people experience. I just was interested in your thoughts there, in terms of not going to your immediate team to vent some of your frustrations. Obviously they're not stupid often, and they can see the situation that's in front of them, but how easy is it to do that? And have you got any hints for anyone
Yeah,
apart
so
from just building that network?
So I firmly believe that as a true leader, you're not there to be friends with your
Yeah.
team. You're there sometimes to make some difficult and unpopular decisions.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to bring in changes that they don't like. So actually, it's crucial that you have your network that you can vent off to, who are outside of your team, sometimes outside of your organisation. And the benefit of that is that it means you've got a completely different set of eyes, but also you learn about how they run business in their department or in their organisation. So your learning continues in subtle but important ways,
rather than making those knee-jerk reactions to things. Basically,
that's right.
It helps educate yourself.
That's right. And also, instead of always doing what you've always done, you actually see new ways of working. So that's important. So when I was an acting sergeant, I didn't have that network, and I only looked to sort of another female within our department, and she wasn't a particularly great role model, because it was either her way or the highway. So at that point, I was really fortunate that I bumped into a friend within the organisation, and she said, "Why don't you come along to Women in Policing," which was a staff association. So the police can't have a union, and rightly so. We can't strike, and rightly so. But what we can have is staff associations. And so I joined the Women in Policing Staff Association, which was there to help women deliver their best. So I went along to one of these meetings thinking, I'm not sure whether this is for me, but actually it was great, because the primary focus was to help women deliver their best. It's not about whinging or moaning.
No.
And so I found that fantastic. It was a network that was there. I believed in it so much that I ended up being chair of Women in Policing.
Of course
and we
you did.
had
You leaned in.
I really did. And we had 1,300 members. So what that meant is that I was encouraging more women to join, so that they had their own network. And it's one of the first things that I say to people is, are you a member of your union, if you can have a union? And are there any clubs or associations that you can join? So speaking really candidly, a lot of men will either go to the football or golf or rugby, and that can be to the exclusion of women not being invited. So women sometimes have got to create their own networks, and it doesn't have to be baking and cake icing. It can be, let's network, let's talk about work, and all the better for it. So if there isn't something there, create it,
join it, or create it. That is brilliant. And I'm sorry to jump in there, but it was just really poignant to me, and obviously the purpose of this today is to do exactly that. Thank you, Vanessa.
Excellent. Okay, so as a sergeant, so I had sort of just over 10 years service, I became a mother, and that was absolutely by choice. It was planned, it was wanted, and my role as mother is actually the most important role I ever have or will do, and so there is not an ounce of regret at all. But we've got some pictorial representations there. There's a lot to do practically. practically. I think the third image, the sleep deprivation, is probably one of the biggest things. I went into my daughter at one point when she was 7 years old, and she asked me to straighten her duvet in the middle of the night, and I'd been in about 6 times that night, and I said, I haven't slept properly for 7 years. So, you know, these, it has an impact. And childcare, you know, the practicalities, it's like arranging, you know, a trip to Africa. It's hugely impactful. But it's not just about children, and I'm firmly of the opinion that actually many people have got commitments outside of work. You may have a partner who has health issues, or you may have elderly parents, or you might have a number of dogs that you foster, or you might have dogs, children and elderly parents, or you might have hobbies or activities, whatever. Real life goes on. And so, you know, I became a mother, but and so I realised that my career development was going to slow down, and actually that was my choice, and that's fine. But I wanted to make sure that I still stretched myself, I still developed, and so I had to sort of devise my little plan for how to do this whilst working around my role as a mother. Next slide, please. So this is where the rather cheesy title of stealth mode came in, really. So what I wanted to do was really stretch myself, and so I volunteered for different roles that nobody else really wanted. So these were dry roles, sort of the non-Gucci roles or the non-sexy roles that nobody else really wanted. But actually I could take these little volunteering roles on, and I could do bits and pieces at a time or a day that suits me. So I became health and safety lead. That's always a dry subject within policing. And yet actually I find it fundamentally important, because if your people aren't safe, then they can't work for you. I volunteered to be the flooding lead for West Mids Police, pluvial and fluvial flooding. So I say that lightheartedly. Nobody else wanted it, but I took it on. I was press liaison within certain roles, and I did absolutely shed loads. So when I had a new inspector come along and review the workload of me and the other 2 sergeants on my department, I was working 0.75 full-time equivalent, so 3/4 of the working week, and my 2 peers were working full-time each, and I had about 3 times as much work as they did, which I thought was quite interesting, really. But I didn't want to give up my work because this was mine. I'd made it mine, and this was my evidence as well, and I was stretching myself. But I could manage this work around being a mother, and so I was able to slowly build up my portfolios of evidence. And what I'd do is I'd look at my colleagues, often sort of, you know, your white male colleagues, and they were being allocated these sexy Gucci roles, you know, the roles where there's a kudos to it, and everybody would be like, oh, what's happening with this, Dean, or oh, James, what's happening with this? Whereas they weren't really interested in what I was looking at. Right up until a promotion process where I was able to share so much evidence that the board would not be able to write it all down, because I was able to demonstrate very clearly what I was delivering on. So I was successful in promotion processes, and people started to realise that and sort of spot how I was doing it. They didn't really want to replicate it because they didn't want to do the boring work, but they could see how I was developing. Next slide, please. So imposter syndrome. It would be, I think it'd be sort of wrong of me not to acknowledge this and sort of call it out. And I know that many networking groups will really focus on this in great detail, and I won't go into it too much. So we all have it from time to time, and I think it's really important that you research it, you recognise it within yourself, you know, what the signs and symptoms are, and then you learn how to deal with it and how to manage it. So throughout my career, I've very much been a, you know, put my hands up, yeah, I'll do that. And sometimes I think, you know, how do I get myself into these scrapes? You know, I did this recently. So about a year and a half ago, I volunteered to do a speech. TED talk style at the Rico Arena in front of 300 people. I mean, what was that? Why did I volunteer for that? This is in front of people who were passionate about the environment, and I had to talk to them for 10 minutes about the fact that if you're going environmentally friendly, i.e. reducing your carbon footprint, you're going online more, therefore you are more vulnerable online, so do this free stuff. So there was a link there. It was a solid link, but oh my gosh, no PowerPoint. And I had to do. How do I get myself into these scrapes? It's because I volunteer for stuff. Well, that's all good and well, but imposter syndrome can creep in. However, for the last 20 years, I've been a coach or a mentor or a buddy. And so how I would help other people would be very much your stereotypical, you're probably grown at this, the stereotypical police officer, investigator mindset. Look at the facts and look at the evidence. So look at the evidence of my ability, my experience, my transferable skills. Look at what my colleagues around me, and see what they think, what their perceptions of me are. So not necessarily people who I like, but people whose opinion I respect. So there's been times where I've worked for some complete characters, however I respect them, and so I would sometimes very quietly ask for some feedback. So I would look at that list of evidence, and then I would compare it to the toxic doubts that imposter syndrome would raise in me, and I would sort of try and look at the black and white of it, and then I would try and sort of down speak the imposter syndrome, the toxic doubts. That's the way I would deal with it. And so it was using logic, it was using facts and evidence. And what I found is the more I practiced it, the easier it got. Because what I think, and I truly believe this, I think that managing imposter syndrome is a skill that's needed for life, not just the first time it hits you or the second time, or not just when you're working in a toxic environment. You need it for the rest of your life, because actually it's a skill that you will need even outside of life. It's a skill that you'll need when you hit retirement and you think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be nobody in the world ever again. So imposter syndrome can attack you or creep up on you in any way, shape or form. And so you need to become resilient to that self-destructing issue. You need to be back in control. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've all heard this absolutely splendid phrase from Eleanor Roosevelt. A woman is like a tea bag. You can't tell how strong she is until you put her in hot water. So next slide, please. So I continued to go for further promotions. So I became an inspector. I then went into the CID arena and became what's called a senior investigating officer. So an SIO will oversee more serious crime types. So I was posted to oversee attempt murders, kidnaps and shootings across Birmingham. And sometimes I would have one of each every day. It's a busy area. One of the roles that I was given on top of that was to oversee all of the crime within Winson Green Prison. So just a little add-on role, and visiting an all-male prison where there's a lot of dangerous offenders. Visiting there as a female was really quite an intimidating piece of work. I never enjoyed it. It was a sorry place to go to, really. However, I did it, and I made changes there, turned around performance within the officers who were there, and improved relations with the governor of HMP Birmingham, who prided himself on the fact that he was a former PE teacher and sport will sort everything out. So who's one of those chaps? Lovely. So I did that role and I nailed that role. I then moved to the public protection unit. So this is in charge of domestic abuse, sex offences and child abuse. So I grew the number of officers within that department at the time when we were trying to save tens of millions of pounds across the force. I was promoted to chief inspector, and this was a really challenging role. I was overseeing complex child abuse across the Black Country. So that's Walsall, Wolverhampton, Sandwell and Dudley. So I was overseeing investigations such as paedophile rings and suspicious child deaths. So absolutely harrowing, especially as a mother. And that was probably one of the most difficult roles I've ever done in my career. So I went for promotion again to superintendent, and I was successfully promoted to detective superintendent. And the chief constable asked me to run a business on behalf of the police. Next slide, please. And that was my reaction. It really was a what? So the business is the West Midlands Cyber Resilience Centre. It's a not-for-profit, police-led business helping businesses become cyber safer. So that was my thoughts on the inside. Next slide, please. Of course, on the outside and in front of everybody, this moment is an opportunity. So I had to try and turn things around, but I'd never run a business. And my tech experience was limited. So this is where it's going to bring it far more back into the room for the people here. So that's great. Yeah, the Cyber Resilience Centre, as you can see, police-led, part Home Office funded and not-for-profit. So that's the region that we cover. So the West Mids Police Force, West Mercia, Warwickshire and Staffordshire. So next slide, please. Prior experience, no training whatsoever. So in the police, there's no training about how to run a business. Absolutely not at all. I had no network. So this is, again, bringing it back to this networking team. And so, yes, the imposter syndrome did come back a little bit. And that was quite unnerving for me. But I was looking at the facts. Well, I had no experience, no training, no network. So actually, I had to sort of look at it in a different way. So I had to be a little bit more self-absorbed and think, well, actually, I've done a shed load of stuff before. I do have those transferable skills and I can do it all again, building from scratch. So I had to learn very quickly about cyber security, cyber resilience, about running a business. And so I invested the time. So my daughter was older, and so I could invest that time. So I went on to particularly LinkedIn, but also YouTube, TED Talks, did a lot of learning. I worked really hard. I was a bit of a tart on LinkedIn. I'd network with anybody and learn from them and see what posts they're putting out, what their vernacular is, what they're talking about. But I also needed to learn about the cyber side of matters. And so I'd make sure that I went along to the CPD events when I could. I was, in many ways, learning to build a plane whilst flying it. But you can do that because, as Eleanor Roosevelt says, you know, you only see how great a woman is and when she's in hot water. And I really was in hot water for quite a while. I had the sleepless nights. I kept on reaching out to try and find role models and really struggled to find people. However, some people found me and they became really helpful. And so I listened and I learned. And so I turned the business around because when I took it on, it was little known, little respected, and little effective. But I did. I worked hard. I started to build up that network. And so Vanessa, and that's who I was, came out and I was able to make that difference. So we help businesses become resilient, and I was resilient. After helping people internally and externally within West Mids Police, I knew that I could run the business and become more resilient. Next slide. So I turned it round. It's well respected. You know, we still get invitations to speak at large events. I'm speaking at the NEC at 2 different events next Wednesday. You know, one of them isn't even cyber. So we're helping about 1,000 businesses now become cyber safer. Now, I knew that I was going to be retiring. And so when the opportunities came up to learn more about cyber and IT, what I decided to do was think longer term and actually think about my deputy. So my deputy is a wonderful woman called Michelle Oren. She is an inspector, and so what I decided to do was prioritise her career development over mine whilst I did the speeches and the presentations. So I supported her in completing her inspector's promotion portfolio. Because she was doing such a niche role, she found it really difficult to correlate it to standard policing. So I helped her with that. Gave her space for her masters in policing, and then shared roles for her to stretch, to lean in, and made all of those introductions to senior executives, and then supported her in gaining those cyber qualifications and nominating her for awards across the region. I think that bottom line is really important. I've worked for some queen bees within policing who want to be the only female within the room, and it's really unhelpful. In fact, it's divisive, and it's toxic in its own right. So women need to help other women. Women shouldn't be bitchy or catty or negative about other women. If you hear it, sometimes it's worth challenging. You don't have to do it in a really sort of robust way, but certainly I try and encourage women to be kind to other women and to say we need to be kind to each other, and sometimes that's all it takes just to help. And so that was what I tried to do. Next slide, please. And there you go. So it's not a very good picture. I'm so sorry, ladies, but that's the women England football team, and they brought it home. And so we can do it. We can bring it home for tech. We can bring women into the tech industry. We are bringing women into the tech industry, and we've got to keep on going. But we've also got to tell women that that's what we're doing. We've got to tell women it's important to get other women into the tech industry. If you put the ladder down, what you'll find is that not only are you helping that individual, you are learning yourself, but also your network just keeps on growing and growing. It wouldn't matter where you threw me within the West Mids police area, there'd be an ally somewhere that I've previously helped or knows of me, and that's the way forward. Next slide, please. So that's it. We are all the difference for women in tech. So that's my story. The technical stuff, I had to do a lot of reading, a lot of research. I had to, invest the time. If I wasn't going to retire, I would have fought for qualifications so that I am respected in a room of tech experienced people. But because I was retiring, I wanted those qualifications, the titles, to go to my deputy. So she's got that long-term resilience. And so it is a case of taking on the battles, making sure you get the qualifications, not just the lovely experience, because those qualifications enable you to hold the line, stand your ground, but also to move on if you need to, because this room isn't listening to you. So that's my little story. I hope that that's been of some interest to some of you. Thank you.